Take a look at these. I laid the photos from the detective agency out on the table, neatly arranging them so my wife, Kimberly, could see them clearly. This is. What is it? You're not about to say, "This isn't what it looks like," or anything cliché like that, are you? I just. What are you going to say? I was forced to go along with it, or something next. The disappointment from being betrayed by someone you trust is profound. The closer you are, the harder the blow, sometimes leaving you questioning everyone around you. But perhaps the only way to restore what was lost is with trust itself. Kimberly and I first met at the entrance ceremony of our high school. Being shy, I worried about whether I'd be able to make friends, but Kimberly approached me without hesitation, asking, "Which junior high did you go to? Do you take the train, bus, or do you bike?" She was naturally gifted at making friends, slipping effortlessly into anyone's circle. Her presence quickly eased my tension, and before I knew it, I'd found my place in class. During high school, I often hung out with a group of 5, 3 guys and 2 girls. We'd gather at someone's house on weekends and held birthday parties 5 times a year throughout those 4 years. Despite being in different clubs, the 5 of us somehow stayed close all that time. When we graduated, I confessed my feelings to Kimberly, and we started dating. I'd had feelings for her for all 4 years, but I didn't want to risk disrupting the balance of our group. When Kimberly and I finally got together, the other 3 were supportive and showed no signs of jealousy. We each went to universities in different states, but after graduation, we returned to our hometowns and found jobs. To this day, we meet regularly and laugh together like we did in our school days. When she turned 25, I proposed to her, surrounded by our friends. I got down on one knee and opened the box with the ring. In the midst of our friends' cheers, "I'd love to spend my life with you." She smiled and said, "Maybe that was the happiest time of our lives." After we got married, Kimberly left her job, saying she wanted to have a child soon. But despite our wishes, we struggled to conceive. Sometimes, she would see news about babies abandoned or subjected to cruel treatment and become furious. If they're going to throw them away, they could at least leave them on our doorstep. I'd raise them, she'd shout. My work grew increasingly demanding each year, and eventually, I was transferred to a department that required frequent business trips. When I was away, she would usually go back to her parents' house or throw parties with friends. But as time passed and everyone in our friend group got married, we only really came together for someone's birthday. One evening, I returned from a business trip to find she wasn't there to welcome me as usual. Even when she was out or visiting her parents, she'd always be home when I returned from a trip. It was already 6 p.m., and I figured it would be a lot for her to make dinner this late. Though I was exhausted from traveling, I decided to prepare a simple meal for the 2 of us. An hour later, Kimberly burst in, slightly out of breath and looking flustered. "Brandon, I'm so sorry. I got back late." "It's fine. It's nothing fancy, but I made dinner. Let's eat together." "Really? That's a huge help. Thank you. Where were you?" "Oh, I went out shopping and just happened to run into someone from my old job. We got caught up chatting, and I lost track of time." I see. Sounds like you had fun." "It's all good." "Yeah, I love that you're always so understanding, Brandon." I thought that if she hadn't seen them in a while, she could have stayed out even later, but I guess she snapped out of it and hurried home. I felt a bit sorry for her in a way. After dinner, when Kimberly was in the bathroom, her smartphone rang. Normally, I'd ignore it, but the name on the screen caught my eye. Scott, one of our old friends. Wanting to catch up with him, I picked up Kimberly's phone. Kimberly, are you okay? Did everything go smoothly? Scott asked immediately, sounding concerned. I wondered what he was talking about. Maybe our friends had gotten together while I was away. Scott, the moment he realized it was me, his voice tightened with tension. Brandon. Yeah, I just got back from a business trip. Is something up with Kimberly? No, it's nothing. All right then. And with that, he abruptly hung up. The whole call felt strange. When Kimberly came out of the bathroom, I told her Scott had called. Oh, did he say anything? She asked. There was something off about that question. If she'd asked, what did he want, or what was he calling about, it would have made sense. But, did he say anything? Almost sounded like she was trying to hide something from me. I don't know. He didn't say why he called. She replied, all right. I'll ask him later what he wanted. Kimberly looked somewhat relieved as she said that. About 2 weeks later, while making a sales call, I ran into Gary, one of our old friends. Gary and I had been in the same class all 4 years of high school, and he's arguably my closest friend. Hey, small world. Have you eaten yet? No, not yet. Great, let's grab lunch together. It seemed he was also out on a sales visit. Man, the other day was pretty crazy, huh? Gary said out of nowhere. I had no idea what he was talking about, and when I didn't respond, Gary looked puzzled, quickly changing the subject. He was clearly hiding something. Come on, what happened the other day? I pressed. Nah, it's nothing. Don't lie to me. I can tell when you're lying. You got me. He genuinely looked troubled, though I hadn't meant to put him on the spot. You keeping secrets from me now? I asked, watching as he got up and made a quick call. You have time, right? Emily's on her way here. Just hang tight, he said as he came back to the table. It felt like I had inadvertently stumbled into some off-limits topic. Gary's demeanor was too serious, and it seemed like he'd rather not handle this alone if he was calling Emily. About 20 minutes later, Emily arrived, apparently nearby by chance. Hey there, she greeted us. Brandon, you're looking well, she added, sitting down next to Gary. The two exchanged a glance, both of them looking uncomfortable. I figured I'd just come out and ask again. Gary mentioned something about the other day. Did something happen? They nudged each other with their elbows, seeming to pass the responsibility of explaining between them. At last, Gary sighed and began to speak. The other day, Scott was in a car accident. What? Are you serious? Was he hurt? Yeah, they took him to the hospital in an ambulance. We rushed there as soon as we got the call, but fortunately, it wasn't serious. He got treated and was able to go home soon after. Oh, thank goodness. I felt a genuine sense of relief. So when exactly did this happen? Well, it was about 2 weeks ago, right? The date matched the day I came back from my business trip. You guys got the call, but how come no one let me or Kimberly know? When I asked, they exchanged glances again, looking troubled. What's going on? I had no idea what they might say next. Why did they look so uncomfortable? Well, Emily finally started, looking as if she had no choice. The one who told us was Kimberly. Kimberly. So Scott called her, and then she let you both know. That would make sense. Maybe she didn't tell me because I was still out on my trip. But then, Kimberly never mentioned anything about Scott's accident. Surely, that isn't something one would just forget to mention. No, Gary said, looking me square in the eyes. Kimberly was with Scott in the car. She was in the accident with him. What? I stammered, feeling completely bewildered. But Kimberly hasn't mentioned anything to me about this, I replied, watching as the two of them shared another uneasy look. She wouldn't say anything, Emily murmured, almost to herself. Her tone made it clear. This wasn't something I was supposed to know. Wait, you're telling me that Kimberly and Scott, yay, probably since before you two were married, Gary admitted, his voice weighed down with hesitation. And it's still happening. What? That couldn't be possible. Even after we got married, we'd still gathered as a group of 5 all the time. So that call from Scott, he was asking if Kimberly was all right because of the accident. Thanks for telling me. That was all I could manage. We're sorry for keeping it from you, Gary said. We'd been pressing Scott about it, asking if he was still meeting up with Kimberly, but he'd keep telling us he wasn't. But we were starting to doubt that. Yay, don't worry, I don't blame either of you. We should have told you sooner, Emily said, visibly upset with herself. Please don't tell Kimberly or Scott that I know yet. I'm still trying to process it all. Hearing this, both Gary and Emily nodded. Understood. Let us know if you need any support. I'll help, too. This sudden revelation about Kimberly and Scott's relationship was hard to believe. I couldn't recall a single moment in high school where Kimberly seemed interested in Scott. Scott had always known how I felt about her, too. Back then, he'd even encouraged me, saying, "Go for it. I'm rooting for you." He'd seemed genuinely happy for us when we started dating, and later when I announced our engagement. And yet, Gary and Emily had known for a long time. I was the only one left in the dark, but it wasn't Gary or Emily who had betrayed me. That fault lay solely with them, deceiving me all along. Keeping up a normal routine felt agonizing. Even Kimberly's usual smiles seemed hollow now, as if they hid her true feelings. Still, I didn't have any concrete evidence to confront her about it, and without that, any accusations would be dismissed. I thought about gathering proof, but then received word of another business trip, this time for 2 full weeks. So I called Gary. "Hey, I'm heading out for a 2-week trip tomorrow. Can you and Emily keep an eye on Kimberly and make sure she doesn't meet up with Scott? Leave it to us." Gary assured me with determination. He probably felt guilty for not telling me sooner, and I guessed Emily felt the same way. To Kimberly, my business trips had likely been perfect opportunities to see Scott. I hadn't thought much of it before, though she did seem a bit more cheerful whenever a trip was scheduled. I brushed it off, thinking she was just happy to have some alone time. It never crossed my mind that there might be more to it. The entire trip, my mind was preoccupied with thoughts of what might be happening back home. What if Kimberly was seeing Scott right now? I couldn't shake the worry. Once my trip was over, I arranged to meet up with Gary and Emily before going home. I needed to hear what they'd found over the past 2 weeks. It seemed Emily had first reached out to Kimberly. "I have something I'd like to talk about sometime soon. Let me know your available days, and I'll adjust my schedule to meet up with you." Kimberly then mentioned having plans on 2 specific days within the 2 weeks. On those days, Gary and Emily followed her by car. And as soon as Kimberly and Scott met up, Gary would show up to disrupt the rendezvous. The same strategy was used on the other day, with Emily stepping in instead. At one point, Emily even made a pointed comment. "You mentioned you had plans today. Were you planning to meet up with Scott?" Kimberly denied it, but when she came home after both meetups had been interrupted, she was noticeably irritable. At the very least, it was confirmed that Kimberly was still in touch with Scott and meeting him regularly. Afterward, I decided to hire a private investigator to gather conclusive evidence of her affair. The results turned out to be exactly what I'd suspected. Since Scott worked in the service industry, he was able to take days off on weekdays, which were usually when their meetings happened. The investigator's report came with pictures, some showing Kimberly and Scott entering a hotel together, others of her getting into Scott's car. Ironically, Scott was engaged to a colleague. and they were set to marry next year. They'd even had a family meeting recently, and his fiancée was an only child, meaning they'd already agreed he'd take her family's surname. Taking the wife's last name seems like it makes you a priority in the family. He'd once told me, they're giving me a new car as an engagement gift, and as it turned out, it was in that very car that Scott had had the accident, with Kimberly as his passenger. With everything exposed, he'd had no choice but to lean on friends rather than family. Armed with the evidence, I decided to tell Kimberly I wanted a divorce. One night, "Kimberly, I'd like to talk to you about something." I called her name in my usual tone. "What is it?" she replied, looking away from the TV to face me, mildly surprised by my serious tone. "You've been seeing Scott, haven't you?" For a moment, she flinched, but quickly regained her composure, saying, "Oh, did Emily and the others tell you something?" "It was just by chance that we ran into each other," she answered, turning her gaze back to the TV. I had expected this answer. "I know about the accident too." "What?" "On the day of the accident, Scott called to check on you, to see if you were okay." "Did he?" "I don't really remember anything like that," she replied, still trying to dodge the truth. "Remember, it was the day I got back from that trip. You were out late and hurried home that night." "I don't remember." "Scott called while you were in the bathroom that night." "Are you sure that happened?" "Check your call history. It's still there, isn't it?" "Is it?" Kimberly took out her smartphone and scrolled through the call history. "There's nothing here." "What?" So she'd deleted the call history from Scott, intending to make it look like I imagined the whole thing. "No, I talked to Scott myself." "Then why don't you just ask him?" It seemed she and Scott had already coordinated their stories. "Enough of this. Why don't you try telling the truth for once? Even if you're lying, you could come up with something better than this." At this, she only pouted. Part of me had hoped that after Gary and Emily disrupted their meetups, Kimberly and Scott might have thought, "This is getting too risky," and stopped. Even if they had broken things off, my anger wouldn't have subsided, but at the very least, I hoped they'd feel some guilt. But it seemed guilt was nowhere in their minds. "Here, look at this." I laid out the photos from the investigator on the table, aligning them neatly for Kimberly to see clearly. "What's this now? Are you going to give me some cliché line about how it's not what it looks like?" I was just. "What's next?" He forced me to go with him. Yes, this was the last time he said he'd stop contacting me. I've been wanting to end it for ages. "Oh, is that why you met up so regularly?" This was it. He said he wouldn't contact me again. I was being misled. "Then how about we ask Scott?" "What?" "I'll call him right now." I dialed Scott and, for good measure, asked Gary and Emily to join as witnesses. It wasn't often that the five of us gathered for something other than a birthday. There was a certain irony in it. Scott looked visibly uncomfortable as he arrived. Gary and Emily's faces were tense, and Kimberly still wore a defiant pout. "Scott, care to explain these photos?" I spread the same photos I'd shown Kimberly across the table, now in front of Scott. Gary and Emily looked over his shoulder, their brows furrowed. "Scott, were you threatening Kimberly?" I asked. Scott's face twisted with anger. "Threatening me? Kimberly, are you kidding? That's absurd." "But Kimberly says she wanted to end things, and you kept pressuring her into continuing." I fought back a laugh. This was just ridiculous. "Hey, Kimberly, why am I the only one being made out to be the bad guy here?" he yelled. "Because I was trying to break it off," she snapped back. "You never said anything like that. And every time Brandon went on a business trip, you're the one who'd reach out to me. Don't lie. Come on, do I seem like the type of guy who would blackmail her into anything?" Scott turned to Gary and Emily in desperation. It was pathetic, this last-ditch act. Then just admit it, Gary said, clearly unable to watch this charade any longer. You two were seeing each other even before Kimberly got married, weren't you? He continued. That's Emily and I knew. We didn't say anything because we thought it would end after the wedding. We thought, once they're married, that'd be the end of it. But why just? Gary's expression was one of bitterness. Exactly. How could you carry on being Brandon's wife with a straight face? Did you look down on him? Emily fired back, her expression full of rage. As the four of them stood there, I simply said, I'm filing for divorce. Sign this. I laid out the divorce papers on the table. With everyone watching, I signed my name. How many people could say they'd signed divorce papers in front of a group? The silence was heavy as I finished signing and slid the papers toward her. Kimberly knew there was no escaping it now. The five of us had once been the best of friends. That was a lie, though, wasn't it? Her former friends, her once closest friends, looked at her with cold, unforgiving eyes. She finally gripped the pen and signed. Somewhere in the silence, someone let out a sigh of relief. I wasn't sure if this sigh that followed was mine or someone else's. However, it was a fact that our marriage was now at an end. If we had kids, this wouldn't have been so easy. It's a stroke of luck that we never had any, I said, trying to motivate myself with self-deprecating words. But the next moment came a voice. That's not true, is it? It was Emily. I turned around to see her. She trembling with anger. Kimberly, you told me Brandon didn't want kids, right? She tears welling up in her eyes. You said you were preventing pregnancy because Brandon didn't want a child, didn't you? Emily finally broke down in tears. She had been avoiding pregnancy to maintain her relationship with Scott. Just when I had started to feel somewhat sentimental, everything took a dark turn. Kimberly wore her usual pout. One truth after another came to light, each one striking me down further. Was Scott really that much better for you? I asked Kimberly. It's not like that, she replied. Then why did you continue the affair? I don't know. It just happened. Just happened. So she thought it was just fine to betray me. What had I been seeing in Kimberly since high school? What about you? Don't you have anything to say? Gary asked Scott. I feel bad about it, that's all. When Kimberly and Brandon got married, I really wanted to end things. That's the truth. Why couldn't you stop? Kimberly said it was fine to keep going, and I thought if she was okay with it, then I could be too. Are you trying to put the blame on her? No, that's not it. They were both at fault. So, in the end, if it hadn't been discovered, you'd still be carrying on with this relationship, I said, and Scott fell silent. That was his answer. I understand your side of the story. When I said this, both Kimberly and Scott showed a momentary look of relief. I only said I understood. Someone is here to talk to Scott, so could you listen to them? Scott looked stunned. Emily opened the door leading to the hallway. Standing there was Scott's fiancée. I had informed her of Scott's long history of betrayal. Scott's face turned pale. What the hell is going on? Why did you call her? That's called lashing out in anger, I replied calmly. Scott, I've heard everything. You're the lowest of the low. Anna, Scott's fiancée, said in a calm tone, while she must have been shaking with anger during the disgraceful exchange. It seemed she had moved past that point. She glared at him as if looking at something filthy. By the way, I recorded our entire conversation. I'm going to pretend this engagement never happened. Honestly, Anna was frightening at that moment. I felt as if I was witnessing the true terror of a woman. Wait, I swear I'll never see Kimberly again. I'll be a good husband. Was he being serious? It was hard to tell, but he was pressing Anna. I've been so foolish. I've woken up now. I'll never betray you again, I promise. Scott said this as he tried to place a hand on Anna's shoulder. At that moment, a sharp sound echoed through the room. Anna, wide-eyed, swatted his hand away. She was strong. This strength was genuine. Anna deeply bowed to us as a farewell and walked away. Scott slumped down, dejected. Kimberly pouted. Gary and Emily sighed. And I stood there in a daze. It was all over. After that, I successfully submitted the divorce papers and raised a toast with Gary and Emily. Thanks to both of you, I feel relieved about the divorce. I appreciate it. The two exchanged somewhat troubled looks. It's not that we wanted you to get divorced. We just couldn't forgive her, Gray replied. Still, because of their sense of guilt and justice, I was able to step into a new life, so I was indeed grateful to them. What about Kimberly now? I haven't contacted her at all. The settlement money was deposited, but that's it. I see. I think we all each immersed ourselves in nostalgic memories. The days of laughing together in high school, the birthday parties we gathered for every year. However, Kimberly and Scott had tarnished all those colors. As for Scott, his engagement was, of course, called off, and Anna demanded compensation from him. Naturally, I was also seeking compensation from him. On top of that, he was being charged for the luxury car he received as a gift to celebrate the engagement. The total came to $100K. Even if he sold the luxury car, its resale value was low due to the accident. I heard he was disowned by his parents too. While it's his responsibility, it's hard to believe how things turned out. Now that I felt relieved, I decided to ask the two of them something that had been on my mind. By the way, are you two dating? It seemed like I was asking too late. Well, I guess we're not officially dating. From their demeanor, it was clear that they had feelings for each other. Thanks to the trouble between Kimberly and me, they had spent more time together and shared many experiences, which deepened their bond. You should just go for it. I think you two would make a great couple. As I said this, they exchanged glances again and blushed. In marriage, this kind of atmosphere and trust is important. Words are significant, but it's rare to find someone with whom you can share an unspoken understanding. If that someone is of the opposite sex, it's likely to develop into a successful romantic relationship. A year passed. I received an invitation to a wedding. It was Gary and Emily's wedding. I checked a box for attending and mailed it back. I knew they would make a wonderful couple. Even now, birthday parties are being held among the three of us. Perhaps in the near future, the birthday parties for their children will become a regular event too. For now, I had been asked to give a speech as a representative of the friends at their wedding. I initially declined, thinking that having a divorced person would be bad luck. But when they told me that if I didn't do it, they wouldn't have a representative speech at all, I accepted. I need to get home quickly and start writing the speech.
Ivana, what are you doing here? I had just returned from shopping when I saw a figure standing frozen at the front door. I was so taken aback that I dropped my shopping bags. What about your honeymoon? I came back alone. Upon hearing this, Ivana started to cry. I am Emily, a 58-year-old housewife. My husband is Oswald, who is 60 years old. And this is about my daughter Ivana, who was supposed to be on her honeymoon, but was inexplicably standing at our front door with her suitcase. Hold on, I'm totally lost here. For now, I led Ivana inside the house to hear the details. I placed Ivana's pink suitcase by the entrance and ushered her, still sobbing, into the living room. I then set a glass of iced tea on the dining table. Ivana began to sip it cautiously. I slowly began to ask questions, trying to piece the situation together.
So you came back from Hawaii all alone?
Yes. She was supposed to be in Hawaii for her honeymoon just 2 days ago.
Why, exactly?
I'm familiar with her husband Lloyd. He's a courteous man, and as far as I know, he has a significant role in a major company. He seemed very promising, like someone who could provide a stable life. That's why we celebrated their marriage. As Ivana began to speak, I learned a shocking truth.
There was another woman there.
Excuse me? On their honeymoon? A woman? My voice cracked in disbelief.
So we ended up spending time together, all three of us.
Wait, what? A honeymoon with 3 people? And a woman you didn't even know? Just hearing that made my blood boil. I pulled out my mobile phone, quickly found Lloyd's contact, and hit the call button. Wait, Mom. Ivana tries to stop me with a weak voice, but I totally ignore her. How dare he do this to my Ivana? Unforgivable. My hand holding the phone trembles. After about 3 rings, Lloyd picks up. Hold on. What's the meaning of this? You're hanging out with another woman? I started ranting without even waiting for Lloyd's response. Then, in an extremely bored tone,
She's my sister, my actual sister.
What are you misunderstanding? What? His actual sister? I don't know where to direct my gaze. Ivana has her head down, too. Sister? Your real sister?
Yes, there's nothing shady going on. She's the sister who lives in Hawaii and couldn't make it to the wedding because her kid had an ear infection.
Oh. So? I have a question too. I can't reach Ivana. Since you seem to know what's going on here, is she back with you? While saying this, Lloyd lets out a sigh on the other end of the phone.
Women really go off the handle so easily, making a fuss, and then fly all the way back to Boston on a whim. Is it the female hormones that make you act so irrationally?
Even if I got it a bit wrong, there's no need for that kind of language. That comment was totally insensitive toward women. I'm getting pretty steamed.
The one who acted on emotion and left is your Ivana.
I'll be staying in Hawaii as planned for a week.
When I get back, I expect a full apology. Please let Ivana know that's the plan.
With that, Lloyd hung up abruptly.
I really can't wrap my head around this situation.
Yeah, me neither.
But Mom, you kind of jumped the gun with that phone call before we could get the full story.
According to Ivana's explanation. As soon as they arrived in Hawaii, it seems Lloyd's real sister was waiting for them at the hotel. Lloyd told me, so my sister will put you through some special training to see if you're worthy of being my partner. I've never heard of a honeymoon where the groom's sister tags along to give lessons in housekeeping. What? We never talked about this. I wanted to visit the beautiful beaches and Mauna Kea Mountain. When Ivana stammered this out. That's your problem, isn't it? Ivana felt emotionally shut out.
But you said you wanted to go, too.
Once my sister's special training is over, we can go wherever we like. Of course, all 3 of us. The reason we chose Hawaii, where my sister lives, is precisely for this. Then, a woman named Sanaya, the sister, said, Enough talk. From today, I'll be giving you an intense homemaking course. I've been doing this for years, as both a wife and a mom. I want to go all out to help my brother's marriage. Off to my house we go. So, it seems this mysterious training started unfolding. So, what happened once you got to the sister's house? I found myself parched. I poured more iced tea into my empty glass to encourage the storytelling. Even though Lloyd is usually serious, it was clear from that phone call that he looked down on women, and Ivana as well. Turning a honeymoon into a housekeeping training camp? Hearing this almost made me want to throw my iced tea in anger. Go on. Ivana continues the story, haltingly. The house they were driven to, Sanaya's home, was cluttered with children's toys.
First lesson in housekeeping cleaning.
Apparently, she was told to clean up the scattered toys.
Next is the shower room and also the toilet.
While Ivana was doing the work, Sanaya, claiming to be supervising his housekeeping skills, was spending time with Lloyd in the living room.
Isn't this basically using your partner for menial tasks under the guise of visiting home? Doesn't it feel like harassment?
When I pressed for more details,
That's not all.
fresh tears streamed from Ivana's eyes.
They told me to make dinner. For Sanaya's family of 4 plus the 2 of us, just using what was in the fridge. I've never cooked for 6 people before. I thought I'd learn how to cook as we went along in our marriage. I couldn't even come up with a menu.
Ivana's ordeal continued.
So, I found some eggplant in the fridge and tried to look up recipes on a cooking community website on my phone. Then Sanaya said, you should be able to cook by eye. Using your phone is unacceptable. She took my phone away and said, this is a failure. I'm going to need to give you some intensive training. We're changing all our vacation plans to stay at our house.
The entire vacation? Even one day would be ridiculous, but the whole vacation?
So, that was it.
Apparently, she took back her phone and returned home, sobbing.
What even is this?
Ivana was really looking forward to their honeymoon. The hotel had a sparkling pool and a view of the blue ocean. They must have been excited to try poke bowls and Hawaiian plate lunches. But Lloyd and Sanaya trampled over those dreams so easily. Then, Ivana, tears streaming down her face, brought up a suggestion.
Interesting. Sounds like a plan.
I decided to support Ivana with all my might. As soon as the honeymoon was over, Ivana received a call from Lloyd.
We're coming over tomorrow to discuss how we're going to live from now on.
When Ivana asked,
What do you mean by how we're going to live? You failed as Lloyd's partner, so we need to discuss what's next. Sis said you're a total failure in the kitchen. We need to talk specifics. Sis is coming with me, so listen carefully and think about where you went wrong.
What? Reflect on my actions. I was about to explode with anger at that arrogant and unreasonable demand. But them coming over actually works in my favor. I decided to handle this calmly. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived, and Sanaya and Lloyd showed up.
Well, Ivana, done any reflecting?
Lloyd starts off with arrogance right away. The serious demeanor he had during our first meeting seemed to have flown away. For now, please come in. I led the 2 of them into the living room.
Now, let's start the Ivana's partner test.
I called out loudly for my husband, who was waiting in the other room.
All right.
My husband walks in holding a yoga mat, a confident smile on his face.
Gotta keep in shape to protect the family. First, we're going to work on our core and back muscles.
My husband has recently become concerned about aging and started going to the gym. With thrice-weekly workouts guided by a personal trainer, he's got a solid chest, even at 60.
All right, we're doing push-ups on this mat. It's a competition. Lower yourself down for 3 seconds, count slowly, and then push back up. That's 1 rep. If you don't stay down for 3 seconds, you won't engage your core muscles. What?
Lloyd, who appears to have never worked out a day in his life, is utterly shocked.
If you're saying Ivana needs a Lloyd's partner test, then I'm going to test if you're fit to be Ivana's partner. Keeping in shape is important for family support and child rearing, too. Now, place your hands slightly wider than shoulder width apart and get into a push-up position. Come on, hurry up.
It felt like boot camp, as if a merciless drill sergeant was waiting to put Lloyd through the ringer. Both my husband and Lloyd assume the push-up position.
And 1.
At that moment, Lloyd collapses onto the floor and can't get back up. He's stuck to the floor like a squashed frog.
Ha 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 ha. You can't do it. I can do 50, you know.
My husband is breezily doing push-ups beside him. His glasses are askew, his tie is crooked. Lloyd remains collapsed.
All right, you're next.
I turned to Sanaya, who was standing there, dumbfounded.
Well, what? Me too?
Now it's Sanaya's turn to be surprised.
You seem to be fond of my Ivana. I'll be the judge of whether you have the ability as a mom and a wife, and whether you're fit to guide my Ivana.
Yes, this was the retaliation plan that Ivana had suggested to me.
Sanaya's home had mold growing in the shower, and her toys were just pushed to the side. She wasn't exactly in a position to teach me how to clean.
Based on what Ivana told me, I had formulated a plan. Then, I forcefully pulled Sanaya into the bathroom.
I've left it dirty just for you. This is your test. Now, start cleaning.
Sanaya tried to deflect, saying,
I came here for a discussion from Hawaii. Huh? Didn't you make Ivana do chores under the guise of guidance and steal his leisure time? Well, I'm just returning the favor. Clean up quickly and call me when you're done. The next test awaits.
I go back to the living room and make some good tea. I hand a cup to Ivana, who's quietly watching the plan unfold, and we both sit on the sofa. Meanwhile, Lloyd is struggling with his workout and getting berated by my husband. His neatly styled hair is now a mess. After a while, Sanaya returns to the living room.
I've finished cleaning.
Oh, that was quick, she says, peeking into the bathroom. It had taken her nearly an hour, so she must have done a decent job. At first glance, it looks clean, but there are clear traces of water streaks on the walls.
If you don't wipe the water off shiny surfaces immediately, they'll get cloudy. Don't you even know that? Especially the mirror, it will get those white water stains. And you dare call yourself Ivana's mentor?
I gave it to her, holding nothing back. Sanaya tried to make an excuse, saying,
There's no mirror in my home shower room. Well, I've heard from Ivana, who cleaned your house, that there indeed was a mirror.
I quickly shot back.
And she said there was also a lot of black mold. Clearly, you've been neglecting it.
Sanaya was left without a comeback. But I couldn't let her off the hook that easily.
All right, next up is sewing. Get to the sewing machine. What?
Just as she thought she could relax after cleaning, another task was upon her.
A sewing machine is a must, isn't it? I've heard your child is still small, but it's a given.
I grinned as I picked up some leftover quilted fabric from when I made Ivana's lunch bag ages ago. Sanaya and I headed to the craft room upstairs. Peeking into the living room, I saw Lloyd was still getting a serious workout. He might even pull a muscle or something.
You'll make a simple bag with this fabric. I've already done the cutting for you. Aren't I kind? A sewing machine, you say? You're not going to tell me you've never used one, are you? You can do all sorts of housework, right?
I took Sanaya's hand and made her sit in front of the sewing machine.
I, don't know how to thread it.
Sanaya looked down, clearly uncomfortable.
Excuse me? So, about threading the machine.
What? What?
I can't thread it.
I looked down at Sanaya, who was frozen in front of the sewing machine, and chuckled in disbelief.
You claim to be a mentor, but you don't even know this?
Ivana. Come here. I called out to Ivana downstairs.
Coming.
Ivana arrives.
This lady here, she doesn't know the first thing about sewing.
As I smirked.
Oh dear, Sanaya, like this.
Ivana threaded the machine for her. Sanaya's face turned beet red, as if she couldn't bear the humiliation.
Now, go ahead.
Surrounded by the two of us, Sanaya started the sewing machine. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The stitching was all over the place. Pfft. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at her poor attempt. Ivana was also holding back a laugh, looking down. Some stitches were too deep, and others weren't aligned at all.
Ivana, show her how it's done, will you?
Sure, but usually, you should do a securing stitch at the edge first.
Well, it can't be helped, can it? She started sewing without any know-how. Our so-called leader here knows nothing.
Ivana skillfully operated the sewing machine, stitching it straight. Having loved sewing from a young age and being in the sewing club through middle and high school, this was a piece of cake for Ivana. Watching that, Sanaya grumbled. You can just pay someone at a craft store to sew the bag for you.
Really? Then what's the difference between outsourcing your sewing to a craft store and replacing your lack of cooking skills with supermarket pre-made meals? There are things you can do that Ivana can't, and vice versa. Stop making excuses and picking and choosing to suit your convenience.
I said just that and headed down to the living room. On the first floor, Lloyd was still sprawled on the floor. It looked like he couldn't even get up anymore. Beside me, my husband was striking some sort of muscle pose.
All right, let's have a talk, all of us.
Still trembling with humiliation, Sanaya managed to take a seat on the sofa, along with Lloyd, who had somehow managed to get up. Ivana, my husband, and I sat across from them.
First, take a look at this.
I laid out the sewing pieces from both Sanaya and Ivana on the table for everyone to see and compare.
It's downright hilarious that someone who can only produce something this shoddy would act like they're in charge.
Lloyd stared at his sister's wobbly stitching, completely stunned. That said it all. Sanaya was at a loss for words, her hands trembling.
This one's a mess, too. Unbelievable that they only had Ivana do the special training.
This time, it was Dad who laid into Lloyd.
You've been going on about women, but we really have to question how you're doing as a man yourself.
I added, driving the point home. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop. That's right, I remembered something Ivana and I had agreed upon that day.
Ivana, go ahead and bring it out.
Ivana presented some documents.
It's not a quick divorce or anything, but I just can't go on with you anymore. I'm glad I realized it sooner rather than later.
Ivana stated it firmly.
What?
Their voices of surprise came out in unison. Both widened their eyes, flustered and mouths moving but no words coming out.
Hold on. I was thinking of forgiving you as long as you showed some remorse.
Finally, Lloyd spoke up.
Sure, I can't cook, but that's not something I need to be sorry about. Devoting all our honeymoon to training and bringing in Sanaya, it's all just too absurd. I can't be with you anymore.
Ivana started signing the papers with a pen.
Wait, so it's my fault you're getting a divorce? All I did was point out your flaws.
Now it was Sanaya's turn to panic. Ivana shook his head.
I never said I can't cook. I was planning on learning eventually. Besides,
she paused for a moment. Just like I have things I can and cannot do, so does Sanaya. Judging that solely based on your own convenience and standards is wrong, she said, setting the record straight. I went in for the kill too. You can't even sew or clean, acting all high and mighty. Plus, you ruined the honeymoon and treated Ivana like a servant. I'm too embarrassed to be related to you. Just sign the divorce papers and get out. And so, Ivana came back to our home. Sanaya got divorced because she was terrible at housekeeping. How dare she continuously harass Ivana, claiming to be some sort of mom or Lloyd's partner, without even considering her own flaws. This is what we call personal responsibility. Meanwhile, Lloyd kept making mistakes at work due to his inconsiderate personality. He even said something insensitive to a female coworker like, "These documents are a mess. Are you not in the mood to work just because you're feeling unwell?" He faced severe disciplinary action and was suspended from work.
Would you come back? If you reflect on this, I believe we can start over, and I feel like I could even get my position back at work.
It seems like Ivana kept getting messages from Lloyd pressuring her to get back together, despite showing no signs of remorse. That's not going to happen. I'm getting married. With that, she promptly cut off communication. Yes, Ivana is set to remarry in 6 months. Her new partner is also a businessman, similar to before, but much more easygoing. He's into a bowling and has a fit physique. As long as I can eat, I'm good. When they dine together, they get excited talking about things like protein for bodybuilding. Ivana, who's now seriously learning to cook, joins her in the kitchen.
I mean, I could at least make scrambled eggs.
While making sandwiches for work, Ivana recalls those days.
It's okay, don't worry about it. You'll get the hang of it as you go along.
With that said, I seasoned the dish just by eyeballing it.